Behind any impressive achievement are often serious sacrifices, and sometimes the sacrifices need to be understood in the truest sense of the word. For the industrial development of China, its citizens pay with their health and lives. And we're not talking about potential human rights violations. It is just about dirty air. Why has smog become the leading cause of death from lung cancer? And why is coal to blame? Did you know that air pollution is among the top 3 causes of death in the world? Yes, it is inferior to cancer and heart disease, but dirty air destroys the body slowly and the direct dependence is imperceptible. It is also partly responsible for cancer and cardiac deaths. Do you know how many people died in China from polluted air? From 2000 to 2016, more than 30 million. And up to 2 million people continue to die annually. The rest lose 3 to 5 years of life. Speaking of dirty air, we need to clarify what this means. The main pollutants are carbon dioxide, sulfur, and nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter per million. There are 2 groups, PM10 and PM2.5, and the latter is more dangerous. Why? It is simple. 2.5 is the volume in micrometers. Unlike the larger PM10, these microparticles are not filtered out by the mucous membranes of the respiratory tract and enter directly into the alveoli of the lungs, where gas exchange occurs. From there, into the blood, after which they are carried throughout the body and enter the brain. If the concentration of PM2.5 is high, then the body will respond immediately: shortness of breath, cardiac arrhythmia, hypoxia. In most cases, their influence is imperceptible, and the effect is cumulative. The cardiovascular and respiratory systems suffer, and among the long-term consequences is cognitive decline. The main component of Chinese smog is PM2.5, and a comparison of Chinese and European figures shows a dramatic difference. WHO recommends that the annual average should not exceed 10 micrograms per cubic meter, and the daily average should not exceed 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And in 2013, the dirtiest year on record, the annual average in Beijing was 170 micrograms per cubic meter, 17 times the norm. In Shanghai, 91 micrograms per cubic meter. And in China as a whole, 50 micrograms per cubic meter. For comparison, data on EU cities for 2013. 2045 Paris, 1638 Berlin, 16 London, 1082 Oslo, 55 Stockholm. Did China have clean air? It's hard to answer. Beijing only started publishing official PM2.5 statistics in 2013. But when did China take a wrong turn, and why are its people paying for it with their lives? Maybe we know the answer. China, after the Second World War, is a country with destroyed infrastructure and a backward economy. Only by 1952 was it possible to reach pre-war indicators. Although during the first 5-year plan of 1953 to 1957, the country built thousands of enterprises and mines with the assistance of the Soviet Union. Then things started to go wrong. First, a bad harvest in 1959 to 61 led to widespread starvation, causing between 10 and 45 million people to die. Then Mao quarreled with the USSR, and the Soviets withdrew all consultants, curtailing financial assistance as well. An economic crisis broke out in the country. It was not until the early 1970s that the situation was stabilized, but then Mao died. And a new period was coming. 1978, the country's leader Deng Xiaoping proclaimed the policy of reform and opening up economic reforms. The goal of the transformation was to be the modernization and development of the Chinese economy, as well as the country's entry into the world market. By the way, official reforms are still ongoing. The question arises, what is critically important for any economy? Electricity. In the 1960s and 70s of the last century, almost the entire world generated electricity by burning coal. But if the developed countries built nuclear reactors and tried to use natural resources, then coal was China's only option. Moreover, it was in abundance in the country. Think about it. In 1965, 88% of all electricity was produced in China by coal-fired power plants. In 1978, this figure was already 71%. but not due to the abandonment of coal. First of all, this was led by the development of transport and the growth in the consumption of petroleum products in the country's energy sector. But that was only the beginning. Until the 1990s, the Chinese economy developed in a planned manner. Realizing that this slows down the process, Deng Xiaoping and the party finally put China on a market track in the early 1990s. After 1992, mass privatization of existing and construction of new industrial enterprises began. This immediately gives the expected effect. Between 1995 and 2009, China's GDP grew at an average rate of almost 10% annually. And certainly, such development required a huge amount of electricity. This is confirmed by the graph of China's coal consumption. It quadrupled from 1990 to 2019, going from 1 billion metric tons of coal to 4 billion. Since 2011, China has consumed more coal than the rest of the world combined. Today, 57% of all electricity in China is still produced by burning coal. In 2015, this figure was 64%, and in 1978, 71%. But it is critical to understand that the country's industrial growth is still ongoing, all in all sectors of the economy at the same time: industry, transport, construction, and others. Therefore, the level of energy consumption by China in absolute terms is constantly growing, and even attempts to switch to alternative energy sources do not reduce it. Right now, China is building a huge number of new coal-fired plants. About 176 gigawatts of coal capacity were built in the world in 2021, and more than half are China projects, within the country and internationally. In 2021, the level of coal consumption increased by 5.2% compared to 2020, and that in turn showed an increase of 4 billion tons in 2019. This figure will only grow in the next few years. At the end of 2021, China announced an increase in its own coal production in the provinces of Shaanxi and Inner Mongolia by 500 million tons. So, what's wrong with coal and coal-fired plants? The fact is that this is the dirtiest way to get energy. Because for combustion, coal is crushed and then burned in a pulverized coal boiler. The heat from the furnace turns boiled water into steam, which is then used to rotate turbine generators. In this way, chemical energy is converted into thermal energy, then into mechanical energy, and finally into electrical energy. The problem is that even at the stage of coal grinding, it is impossible to completely exclude the ingress of small particles into the atmosphere. But even worse, after the combustion of the mixture, coal ash remains. Yes, filters of various degrees of purification as well as various technologies are used to separate it. But as practice shows, this is not enough. Another problem that is specific to China is the burning of brown coal, a younger version of hard coal. It requires larger furnaces and contains more ash, which means even more harmful emissions that enter the atmosphere. As a result, despite all the benefits, most countries recognize coal's harm and close existing coal-fired power plants, as well as cancel the construction of new ones, while Asia, led by China, has no plans to abandon it. Why is it so? It's simple: efficiency and profit. Coal remains the cheapest and one of the most efficient fossil fuels. In terms of the amount of potentially produced electricity per unit area, it is generally unrivaled and can generate 40 to 50 times more energy than solar photovoltaic cells or wind turbines. Let's be honest, for China, with its ambitions and plans, the cost will be at the forefront for a long time to come. Therefore, coal-fired power plants will continue to pollute the Chinese air. The only question is how much and for how long. Are there reasons for optimism? There are, although with some skepticism. It was only after 2013, which was called air apocalypse in China, because of the level of air pollution, that the country began to implement a plan to upgrade the coal industry. A war on air pollution has also been declared. As of 2022, according to the Chinese authorities, more than 80% of the old power plants have been updated and received modern cleaning and filtration systems. Even so, they cannot provide 100% absence of emissions, and it's not clear what happened to the remaining 20%. Also, in the period from 2016 to 2021, China made the following commitments to the global community on climate issues. Number 1. Until 2030, the country will reach the peak level of carbon dioxide emissions. Number 2. Before 2060, China promises to become carbon neutral. Number 3. By 2030, the share of non-fossil fuels in the energy sector will increase to 25%. Now it is 16%. And China partially fulfills these obligations. Today, the country is the world leader in terms of investments and growth rates of alternative energy sources. China produces almost a quarter of the world's wind power and has 2/3 of the world's solar power. The country is also investing in cleaner fuel sources such as gas. In 2019, it accounted for 8.1% of total energy consumption, although 10 years ago it was only 3.5%. The goal is 10%. What is more, China develops nuclear power. There are 53 nuclear reactors in the country, and only France and the USA have more capacities. The plan for the year 2025 is global leadership. All this has already had its effect. Since 2014, when Prime Minister Li Keqiang declared a war on air pollution, the country's emissions have been reduced by 40% according to satellite data. Beijing has become cleaner by 50 to 60%. In 2021, the average annual level of PM 2.5 particles in the capital was 33 micrograms per cubic meter. And although this is 3 times higher than the WHO norm, world experts call such progress phenomenal. But at the same time, the country continues to extract and use more and more coal, building new, allegedly more efficient power plants. The most dramatic thing in this situation is that the point of no return has long been passed. Irreparable harm has already been done to people. More than 30 million people died from pollution-related causes between 2000 and 2016 alone. And according to some estimates, up to 4,000 people continue to die in China every day. The rest live, but at least 3 years less than they could. Moreover, a sharp reduction in pollution levels will not have the same rapid demographic effect. First, the air is still 3 times dirtier than normal. Secondly, the population of China is aging, and the older generation is primarily affected by the lethal influence of dirty air. That is, people will continue to die more frequently. Thirdly, the second risk group is children who, at a young age, receive irreparable harm to health. The conclusion is the following. Even the impressive achievements of recent years are not enough to completely block the negative impact of polluted air on the lives of the Chinese. But why is this still happening? Why does coal continue to kill over 1 million Chinese every year? In fact, both the government and the people of China are ready to pay with their health for the rapid economic development of the country and increased well-being. It is better to live richer and shorter than to live in poverty and longer. Everyone understands that without a gigantic level of energy consumption, the country would never have made its leap. And it seems that China and the Chinese are quite in agreement with such a heavy price to pay for their economic growth. However, as the country's prosperity grows, more and more voices are heard insisting on caring for the health of the nation.